Ross Tucker, Westwood One, CBS Sports, NFL, college football analyst, and host of the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. All right, couple of things to talk about here. I want to talk about Larry Allen, former teammate of yours, and I also want to talk about what's going on with the wide receivers right now, because Justin Jefferson got paid. CeeDee Lamb's not at training camp, and I'm thinking he kind of knows what his window is here, or at least Jerry Jones would know. Shouldn't that deal get done if they do want to pay CeeDee Lamb?
Dan, I'm at a loss for what the Dallas Cowboys are doing from a contract standpoint. I really don't understand it. You know, as you know, I do the Eagles preseason games, and the Eagles' philosophy is as soon as you identify a player as being a core player that you want to have around for a long time, sign him and extend him then, because the price is only going to go up. Meanwhile, Dan, the Cowboys' three best, most important players right now, Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, Micah Parsons, all have contract issues. None of them are happy with their contractual situations. I've heard where Jerry Jones has said he wants a few more hands to be played, which I think is insulting. I mean, on the one hand, you can say what he wants to see, how Dak or CeeDee Lamb or Micah Parsons plays. Maybe there's a chance they could suffer some type of catastrophic injury. But when I hear Jerry Jones say he wants to see some more hands be played before he gives them the big contracts, two thoughts. One is I think it's really insulting to those guys. I mean, you're CeeDee Lamb, Micah Parsons, Dak Prescott, and Jerry Jones hasn't seen enough to this point to identify you as the guy he wants to have around. And then the other thing is the reason why the Cowboys are in this position and will continue to be in this position, they're going to have to pay all three of those guys now at the top of the market. Micah Parsons isn't taking less. He already said it. He wants to be the highest paid non-quarterback. CeeDee Lamb, I'm sure, thinks he's as good as Jefferson and will get that money. And Dak has crazy leverage over them because of his salary cap number. As you know, Dan, it's the most well-endowed, it's the most valuable franchise in all of pro sports. They could easily, a year ago, have given these guys huge signing bonuses, spread it out to get that salary cap proration. I really don't understand it at all.
Yeah, unless Jerry is kind of betting on one of those guys is not going to live up to expectations this upcoming. Like, it's just weird. You're almost hoping they don't outperform what their contract is going to call for, which is crazy. You want Micah Parsons to be Defensive Player of the Year. You want CeeDee Lamb to have 120 catches and 12 touchdowns. And you want Dak to be in the MVP race. That's going to cost you even more because you're on the clock. So it's almost as if Jerry's saying, well, what if they underachieve? Maybe I don't have to pay them as much. Or I let one of them walk.
You know, and the thing that, to your point, which I think is really interesting, is that I guess I sit here sometimes and I think, do they just want to pay him as late as possible? Is it just a cash thing? Because you're right. It's almost on some level like they're rooting for that to happen. I don't think that that's the case.
You're delaying the inevitable, it feels like.
1,000%. And I think, Dan, that Jerry Jones wants these players and their agents to give a discount because they play for the Cowboys, meaning all of the primetime games, all of the off-the-field opportunities. You see Dak on all these commercials. Micah's got all this stuff going with Bleacher Report and all these things. I think and maybe there was a time where players did that because there was such a difference between being a Cincinnati Bengal and a Dallas Cowboy, or a Jacksonville Jaguar and a Dallas Cowboy. I think with social media and with the internet, I don't think that's as much of a difference as it used to be. And I don't think any of these players are buying the notion of taking less to play for the Cowboys.
They moved on from Amari Cooper a couple of years ago when, he wanted big money there. So I don't know if Jerry's willing to do that. We're talking to Ross Tucker, our good buddy. You got to have a brief pit stop with the Cowboys. Larry Allen was there. Can you give people a sense of the aura of Larry Allen with the Cowboys?
Yeah, well, it's crazy because it was only my second year. It was 2002. and I got cut by Washington. I got claimed off of waivers the next day by the Cowboys, in part because Larry was hurt. I went there, and this is a guy, Dan, I'm 23 years old. I had watched Larry the whole time I was in high school, the whole time I was in college, and now I'm out there, and he can't play. So I have to replace him. So at least the first game, maybe the first couple games, Dan, he was still trying to practice. So he was still listed as questionable. So I'm starting at left guard for the Dallas Cowboys in place of the injured Larry Allen. Those first couple games, Dan, you have never seen guys so happy to see me in your whole life.
On the other team.
Yeah, the D lineman. I came out of the huddle, and all those guys for the Colts, certainly Henderson and Stroud for the Jaguars, they're like, oh, thank God. Oh, thank God it's this guy. I mean, it's not a good sign when you're a pro football player and your opponent is glad that it's you. I'm so glad you're here, Tuck. So glad you're here. I remember, Dan, we were going over bull rushes, okay? And how to counteract a bull rush. And most people know this, but a bull rush is when the defensive tackle or whoever just tries to run straight over you and through you. And I had just gotten there, and I didn't know. I mean, Larry Allen didn't know me at all, and he's trying to help me. And he's like, "Tuck, you just got to stop, and you just jam the guy, and you punch him, and you." I said, Larry, you just stop and jam the guy and punch him. I said, if Marcus Stroud tries to bull rush me, I will be hanging on for dear life. I will not be punching him and stopping him right there. What I appreciate the most, I think, about him, Dan, there's a lot of guys that have, made the Hall of Fame. There's been a bunch of good players. What I adored about Larry, and still do, is he was trying to hurt people. And I don't mean injure. But he had the mentality out there that he was trying to physically punish people. He wanted to inflict pain. He wanted to smash you into the ground. Not all offensive linemen are like that. And I love that. Listen, you don't get to score touchdowns. People don't really know your name unless you screw up. Just like blocking a guy isn't fun. If we're going to be 320 pounds, the fun part is smashing the guy into the ground and feeling the breath go out of their body. What I loved about Larry is he was really trying to put people down. And I think that's one of the reasons why offensive linemen hold him in such high regard.
I want you to tell me what you think of C.J. Stroud, the Texans quarterback. He was on $1 Million Worth of Game podcast and had this to say comparing Matthew Stafford and Aaron Rodgers.
Stafford a dog.
He
bro.
is a dog.
No, you don't understand, bro. You saying that. That's all I watch. I don't watch nobody else. I watch Mahomes at times because Mahomes does some stuff that like you can't coach. Stafford, dog, he will beat you with the same thing every time. All that no-lick stuff, I got that from bruh. Like literally, that's one of my big, like I'm a fan of his. Like if you give Matthew Stafford a chance like Aaron Rodgers, I guarantee he might have had more rings for sure. I think Matthew Stafford.
Matthew Stafford had more rings than Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, he have another ring probably.
I'd say he had like 3, 4.
Okay. C.J. Stroud, he loves him some Matthew Stafford. I don't think anybody's ever questioned Stafford's talent. I think they just questioned, can he lift a team up, that maybe has a subpar supporting cast, and he played in the same division as Aaron Rodgers. Is Stafford a better quarterback than Aaron Rodgers?
No, I don't think so. But it's so funny. I actually wrote about this last week for the 33rd team, talking about how circumstantial careers are, Dan. And we could do this with every sport and whatever. But I would love if we could go back to 2008 and put Aaron Rodgers on the Lions and put Matthew Stafford on the Packers and see how it unfolds. Rodgers was ridiculous. I mean, he was an incredible player. But it's been proven over time that he was in a much more stable organization. Now, flip side is, Dan, how much you think Aaron Rodgers would have loved to have had Calvin Johnson, for 7 or 8 years, right? So I think they're both very good players. Do I think Stafford would have had a better chance in Green Bay? Absolutely. Do I think Rodgers would have had as much success in Detroit? No. I think I'd still probably lean Aaron Rodgers. But the point is where you get drafted makes a big difference in your career. And those guys are great examples of that. I've said for a long time, we don't talk about this enough, Dan. For the Packers to have Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers for 30 years, they had 30 years of top 5 quarterback play to only go to 3 Super Bowls. That feels like a missed opportunity.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, to think of how many New England and Brady and Belichick went to, and the Packers with Favre and Rodgers only even got to 3 of them. That seems like they'll be, and now they have Jordan Love, but it feels like Packers fans will look back on that. Maybe they already do and say, how do we not win more?
C.J. Stroud also said that he would take Eli Manning's career over Aaron Rodgers. Would you?
Absolutely not. I think that's insane for a bunch of different reasons. I think what Stroud is trying to say is that he likes the fact that Eli won 2 rings and Aaron only has 1. I think if you're a Texans fan or if you're a fan of CJ Stroud, you want him to have that mentality. But I think most people would agree. I think Eli Manning would be the first one to tell you that Aaron Rodgers is a better quarterback than him. Now, I don't know that Eli would tell you he'd rather have Aaron's career, but I think Eli, let's put it this way. I mean, I know CJ said he'd rather have Eli's career. I don't think you'd find a single person to say that they think Eli Manning is or was a better quarterback than Aaron Rodgers.
We've talked about quarterbacks and when do you pay them. I wanted another year out of Kyler Murray, another year out of Tua. Like I always go, let me see one more. I know it's tricky where you don't want to offend your star quarterback and we're going to extend you earlier. But with Tua, I'd still like to see another year. I mean, he was healthy. He's got really good receivers there. He looks great, by the way. You're going to have to pay him Jared Goff money. Would you pay him, let's say, $53 million a season?
So the thing that's interesting about Tua is the health component. So the answer is yes, I would pay him $53 million a year because, as he said yesterday, the market is the market, and he's earned it. He has been fantastic the last couple of years, right? He has been. And he's a perfect fit for Mike McDaniel's offense, and McDaniel's done an unbelievable job tailoring things to him. What makes him different is especially the concussion stuff, but also the hip injury he had at Alabama. You know, I think they're probably fine on the average per year, Dan. It's going to be the structure and the guarantees. You know, the Dolphins, Dan, you can't give a guy over $130, $140 million guaranteed, and then he has one more concussion and says, you know what, I'm done with pro football, and just collects that. It's the reason why if they ever went to fully guaranteed deals in the NFL, they'd be shorter and smaller than people realize. You can't have a guy have one more concussion and go to he can go to a brain surgeon, neurosurgeon who says he should never play football again. And so he gets all the money. The Dolphins are going to have to protect themselves in some way, especially with Tua from the head injury concerns.
Before I let you go, I know you're doing some fun things, some important things at West Point today. Let the audience know what you're doing.
Yeah, it's I'm actually at the U.S. Army War College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. It's pretty cool, Dan. Yeah, so I'm at the National Security Seminar. I'm, I guess, considered a civilian VIP, but I got an email. It was a cold email from a colonel who's heard me do the West Point games and said, hey, do you want to be a civilian VIP at the National Security Seminar? So what happens is the people that are here, they all have 20 years of military service in, and they're going to be at least a colonel, and a lot of them will end up becoming generals. So after 20 years, it's kind of like getting your doctorate in military strategy. So I've been sitting in on all of the classes the last couple of days. It is unbelievable. Yeah, I mean, that's a much longer conversation. What I would just say is that these men and women and the U.S. military, U.S. Army in particular, extremely impressive. Not that we didn't already know that, but I'm blown away.
Yeah, graduation week. Do they have a football team at the War College?
No, but you know what's so funny? Last night I went to the commandant's reception. You're gonna love this, Dan. I went to the commandant's reception, and his house is unbelievable. And in there, they have the football from when the Army football team played the Carlisle Barracks team, which at the time was Native Americans, and the Carlisle Barracks team beat West Point behind this guy named Jim Thorpe, who was pretty good athlete, pretty good football player. The commandant's house had the football from that game in like 1918.
Wow.
They played here, and Jim Thorpe and the Native Americans beat West Point, which is like, obviously back in the day, West Point was amazing. So they don't have a football team now, but they used to, evidently.
Great to talk to you again, as always. Thanks for joining us.
Of course, my pleasure. Thank you, Dan.
That's Ross Tucker, Westwood One, CBS Sports NFL college football analyst, and his podcast, the Ross Tucker Football Podcast.